Good evening, everyone. I'm Kaija Langley, Director of Development for the MIT Libraries. And on behalf of our director, Dr. Chris Berg, I welcome you to this evening's Fall MIT Reads 2025 presentation. The libraries are an engine for creating, sharing, and safeguarding knowledge at the Institute and beyond. The libraries work to improve the world's collective knowledge by equipping current and future scholars with the best content and the skills to use it, whether examining medieval manuscripts or managing research data. As part of this work, our MIT Reads program invites the MIT community to hear from leading authors and to engage in solution-centered discourse on some of the world's most complex challenges facing our campus, the nation, and the world. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This webinar is being live streamed and recorded. It will be available on the MIT Reads website in the near future. A very special thanks to all the MIT staff who have made this presentation possible, including Sylvia Figueroa Ortiz, Aya Fujita Ross, Julia Lanigan, Emily Kramer, Marcella Tam, Lauren Fairman, Brigham Fay, Ned Wolf, and Shannon Hunt. We also greatly appreciate our community partners at the MIT Press that both published tonight's selection and have copies of the book available for sale at their MIT Press website. As this is a webinar, you'll find that the chat is disabled and all parties are muted. You will be able to submit questions and comments for our guests throughout the presentation on your screen, and staff are recording them off screen for discussion when we reach the Q&A portion of this presentation. In a moment, I will provide introductions for our guests, and our author will share a few brief insights into why he created our MIT Reads selection, followed by a discussion with the author and our moderator. Without further delay, allow me to introduce this evening's author and moderator. On Disinformation, How to Fight for Truth and Protect Democracy by Lee McIntyre couldn't be a more timely book for discussion today. Lee is a research fellow at the Center for Philosophy and History of Science at Boston University and a senior advisor for public trust in science at the Aspen Institute. Formerly executive director of the Institute for Quantitative Social Science at Harvard University, he has also served as a policy advisor to the executive dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard and as an associate editor in the research department of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston. The author of 10 books, 5 of which have been published by the MIT Press. On Disinformation, How to Fight for Truth and Protect Democracy is best described as, and I quote, a powerful, pocket-sized citizen's guide on how to fight back against the disinformation campaigns that are imperiling American democracy, end quote. In conversation with Lee this evening is Rebekah Larsen, an assistant professor in MIT's Comparative Media Studies Department with affiliations at the Berkman Klein Center at Harvard and the Center for Governance and Human Rights at the University of Cambridge. An early career media sociologist, her work uncovers and analyzes understudied media ecosystems, particularly those with insightful relations to the traditional press and concepts of misinformation. Lee and Rebekah, thank you so much for joining us. Now, Lee, we welcome hearing your insights, and we're turning it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much for the warm introduction, and thank you for everybody who worked so hard to make this happen. I so wish that I could be there in person, and this could have been an in-person event. I managed to break the L4, L5 in my back, so I couldn't fly. So it had to be converted to a virtual event. And thank you to everybody at MIT who worked so hard to make this event still possible so that we could do it. When I was a teenager, really just emerging as an independent reader, I became fascinated with dystopian fiction. 1984, Brave New World, Fahrenheit 451. I don't know what it was about those books, but they always struck me. Something that I cared about was under serious threat here, but the fact that it was fiction made it somehow more palatable. Yet the danger and warning for the future never left me. As I look back, I realize that in all three of these books, not only are people and entire societies under threat, but truth itself. More than this, the mechanism by which people are oppressed begins with hostility to truth and the written word. Books are burned. Information goes down the memory hole. The Bible is left in a corner where it is moth-eaten and forgotten. Whatever books do exist are written and produced by machines for public entertainment. The human mind is taken out of the process, either in the creation or the consumption of books. We are distracted with entertainment while the world burns. How do these things go together? I think that what Orwell, Huxley, and Bradbury were warning us about is something that fascists learned early, and these lessons are still being practiced today. That control over a population always starts with control over information. In our own era, we find words and people again under assault. In a time when practically the entire sum of human knowledge is as close as our iPhones, we are drowned in a sea of misinformation. Yet, ironically, an important part of this misinformation is made up of people who deny that the misinformation problem even exists. More and more, we find hyperbolic political rhetoric, usually coming from the right, claiming that we live in an era of great censorship, that misinformation isn't really definable, or is rare, or may not even exist. But how can all of these things be true at the same time? Everyone understands what true censorship is. It's when information is taken away, changed, destroyed, when it's put down the memory hole. It's what happens when school board members in Florida want to ban certain books, or the Chinese government doesn't allow its citizens access to certain websites. And this is the framework that some right-wing members of Congress in the United States have latched onto when they don't like content moderation or deplatforming that refuses to amplify the kind of lies that serve their political goals. Ask yourself, who would defend the idea that misinformation has a right to exist? Someone who profits by it. That's who. They will defend misinformation as, quote, alternative speech, or recommend that one should just let everyone speak and truth will somehow magically rise to the top. Yet loads of empirical work has shown that this just isn't true, that misinformation is more prevalent now than ever, that it's having a terrible effect on us, and that where there's a competition between lies and truth, lies almost always win. To claim that the fight against misinformation is censorship is to misunderstand what the fight against misinformation is really about, which is the preservation of truth. But more than this, I think that disinformation is really itself a form of censorship. Do you remember that scene in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where Harrison Ford has finally found the Holy Grail, but he can't tell which one it is because it's surrounded by 1,000 fakes? That's the point of disinformation. If you can't hide or destroy the truth, you can cover it up with bullshit. There's always time to kill it later. The goal of disinformation and censorship are really the same, which is to subvert the truth. Whether you destroy the truth or surround it with 100 fakes, the outcome is the same. People can't find it. And this is why I believe that in our current era, even when truthful information is all around us, it is nonetheless the case that truth has never been under greater threat. We live in an era in which, as one wag recently put it, the truth is behind a paywall and the lies are free. In my 2018 book, Post-Truth, I defined this notion as the political subordination of reality. In my 2023 book, On Disinformation, I extend the story and explore how we got into our current situation and what we might be able to do about it. Disinformation is a strategic tool that is created by malign actors who seek to weaponize and amplify false information to form an army of believers so that they can get what they want: money, ideology, or power. But the point isn't merely to get someone to believe something false. It's to dominate their reality so completely that they're less likely to resist. Indeed, in some cases, people may simply give up. The great political philosopher and Holocaust historian Hannah Arendt once said this, quote, "If everybody always lies to you, the consequence is not that you believe the lie, but rather that nobody believes anything any longer. And a people that no longer can believe anything cannot make up its mind. It is deprived not only of its capacity to act, but also of its capacity to think and to judge. And with such a people, you can then do what you please." End quote. That last line always gives me chills because it makes explicit the connection between disinformation and the threat to democracy. If you control the information that someone hears, in some sense, you can control their reality. And when that happens, you make them much more pliable for control through autocracy, authoritarianism, fascism, whatever you want to call it. I think that repression, torture, persecution, deportation, incarceration, execution are the end game of this strategy. But it always starts with targeting truth tellers and their power over the written word. Orwell, Huxley, and Bradley understood this. Though each had different ways of characterizing it, they were all talking about the same thing: how the subversion of truth is a necessary step in the oppression of people. And although they all presented this within the context of fiction, the truly frightening thing for me is that what I saw presented in novels and my most fevered dreams when I was a teenager are now in danger of becoming reality. That's all I have to say about that. And I would be more than happy to have a conversation with Rebekah.
Thank you, Lee, on multiple fronts for showing up today, despite all of the roadblocks, but also for writing this book. It's so powerful, so focused on galvanizing citizens. And as an academic who's often in the weeds about complexities and specificities, it was very refreshing to read a book that weaves that so well. What can we do right now? But also here are some empirical things that are happening. So I'm going to start off with a question that's directly connected to the comments you just made. So in On Disinformation, your 2023 book, you argue that disinformation today isn't just confusion or error. It's a deliberate campaign to create deep distrust. It's strategic denialism for political or ideological gain, or for profit, monetary profit, as you argue. And this is an approach that's different from some scholars and journalists. He's just drawing a very sharp line between misinformation or unintentionally circulated problematic information and disinformation, the intentional falsehoods that you describe being spread for power or profits. You even go so far as to call misinformation at one point in your book a euphemism. So why is that distinction so central to your argument? And do you think that distinction still holds up 2 years later and where we are now politically?
Great question. Yes, I do think it holds up today more than ever because, I mean, language is important. What you call a problem matters for whether you feel empowered to do something about it. And I see this so much on cable news when they even bother to talk about the problem of mis or disinformation. They prefer to use the term misinformation. And I think that they do that because, well, because the terms have become politicized. Now, you ask yourself, who politicized them? who didn't want you to, to hear it one way or the other. But the problem is that the media tend to like the word misinformation because it's this umbrella term that gets them out of the problem of having to talk about who's behind it. Misinformation is a mistake, but disinformation is a lie. And if there's a lie, there has to be a liar. So the minute they say disinformation, then they have to say who the liar is and what the liar hoped to get out of it. And the problem is that if you report on the problem as one of misinformation, then it's just a confusion, a mistake. But it's not often a confusion or a mistake. I mean, think about if something is misinformation, then it could be cleared up by getting evidence. You go, oh, really? Oh, I had heard it the other way. I didn't know. I always thought that corn snakes were dangerous, but it turns out they're not. I was misinformed. I would get mixed up which is which. I don't know. Is it a king snake, coral snake? Who knows? So that's misinformation, just kind of accidental that somebody hears and they get it cleared up. But disinformation is a plot, and that's a danger because think about what you're empowered to do if you hear that something is misinformation. What can you do? It's like a natural disaster. Hurricane's coming, put your head down, put some, board up your windows. There's really nothing you can do. But if the problem is disinformation, then there is something you can do because it is a plot. There are people behind it. They have interests, and you can expose those interests and expose the people.
That really resonates. Again, as an academic who I would say more often I see in academia that we use the umbrella term misinformation for all disinformation these days because of the sort of, social, cultural, political economy texture around disinformation. But it is like in some ways very limiting when we're approaching this as like, what can we do? So I think I also want to ask you another question since you've brought up cable news. That's a great segue for us to talk about another really useful framework throughout your book. The three groups that you describe and you break down in terms of disinformation flow and success in terms of strategic denialism. So the truth killers or creators, the amplifiers, which cable news would be one, and the believers. So can you walk us through what these actors are, how they connect to each other, and if we get to it, where you think the real leverage points are for change?
Sure. And I just want to apologize for the commotion behind me. My 15-year-old German Shepherd Gigi has decided to come in and join me. She hears me start to talk about disinformation. She just says, "Ooh, it's nap time. I'm going to lay down on the couch." So you hear all that jingling. That's what's going on behind me there. But
you might have to pay the dog tax at some point.
Wingman, yeah. Okay, so when we're thinking about what to do about the problem of disinformation, it's important not to waste our time because the problem is so great. And our tools are sort of limited or can be misused. I mean, we have to identify what we can do and put our efforts in the right direction. So the reason I even have chapters called the disinformers, the amplifiers, the believers. If you think so, how do you solve this problem? Well, I see that as a pipeline. It goes from the disinformers to the amplifiers to the believers. Can you get a disinformer to stop creating disinformation? By and large, not. Why would they? Why would they stop? It's something that benefits them. I mean, think about the cigarette companies in the 1950s that created disinformation about whether cigarettes were addictive or were dangerous for your health. They did that for profit. How could you get them to stop? Why would they stop? They didn't want to stop. Sometimes disinformers are in foreign countries, and so no matter what law you pass, in the US, you're just not going to stop them. Disinformation with AI now is so easy to create. I mean, you are not going to be able to stop the supply side of disinformation. It is coming, and it's going to be terrible. I just read the other day about Sora, which is a new version of version of from the people who brought you Chat GPT. What they did for text, Sora is going to do for video. So you can put the face of whomever you want into a video and have them do whatever you want. Oh my goodness, well, geez, how could that go wrong? But I mean, the possibilities for disinformation are going to be endless in the hands of a malign actor. And you can't get malign actors to stop doing malign things because that's who they are. Turn the telescope around, look at the other end, the believers. Believers have gotten the brunt of the invective, the hatred, the name calling in what's going on in the information war that is the United States these days. Look what happened during COVID. Look what happened, for climate change. I wrote a whole book on this called How to Talk to a Science Denier, making the argument that you needed to talk, and that's even the word denier. That's not good. That's name calling. But you need to talk to people one-on-one to see if you can reach them, the human contact. But you know what? I mean, it embarrasses me to say I wrote a whole book on this, but it's not a scalable solution of the information problem, though it may be the right thing to do or the right thing to do for science. But the huge problem that we have today, it's not enough, because think of it this way: the people who believe the lies are victims. And in some cases, they're the people who are the worse off. I mean, because they're not only amplifying disinformation, which I suppose you could make an academic argument at that point. Is it still disinformation? Isn't it misinformation? Because they're not, doing it knowing it's false. Okay, we could talk about that for a few hundred years in a philosophy seminar. But
Yep.
they're dying of COVID. They're believing the lies about whether they're microchips in the vaccines, and a lot of them died of COVID. So I mean, they're the victims, and victims deserve empathy. And yes, we should talk to them. It's the human thing to do, but it's not enough to solve the problem. I think that the only way we're going to solve this problem is to grab the pipeline and squeeze in the middle, the amplifiers. Sometimes believers amplify. Yes, they do. But what are the tools of amplification? The tools of amplification are cable news, social media, paid media. It's that those are going to be the areas where we can do more. And we really, it's sad to see the extent to which they have crumbled under the pressure to do something. Now saying that because they can't do everything, they're going to do nothing. And I'm thinking here of the Facebooks and Twitters of the world, who just have kind of given up on content moderation because they I don't know. I don't know why.
Yeah, I mean, this is talking of pinch points and the amplifiers. Yeah, I was wondering how you would, if you rewrote this book 2025, if you could write it like that, given what's happened with the third-party fact-checking program at Facebook, with all the kowtowing, the inauguration funding, the line behind Trump at the inauguration of tech people. Do you think, is there some way that you would rewrite, especially this chapter on the amplifiers, and that being a particular pinch point for the disinformation pipeline?
I wish I could rewrite it, because the book was not successful enough, to the scale of the problem. I don't know what more I could have said. I mean, are there other things that I could have said, other avenues? Surely I think there would be. I mean, I probably would have said more about, the profit motive of the amplifiers. I mean, the amplifiers, if you think about it, the algorithms in social media or the profit motive in major media, even in mainstream media. I mean, sometimes you wonder, why would they change either? I mean, are they, if they know they're doing something wrong and they do it anyway, doesn't that make them complicit? Shouldn't that be called out a little bit more than I did? So yeah, I probably would say more about that. But it's hard because it's a short book, but I really put everything I had into it. And I don't really know what more I could say to solve that problem. There is one thing that I would say, and it's what people ask me about now. Because we're up to our hips in fascism now. It's not just a warning, it's here. I just read today that the FBI has now increased by 300% the number of people who are under investigation for domestic terrorism. And there are people on the left. There are people who don't have, quote, American values, Christian values. I mean, is this going to result in detentions? Am I going to go to jail someday? We're hip deep in this already. I think of Alexei Navalny. I mean, he was not hip deep, he was over his head deep in an electoral dictatorship, but he still told the truth. Why did he do that? He did that because he recognized that even one voice for truth is a thorn in the side and an inspiration to all the other people in society. Telling the truth and amplifying the truth is important. I didn't say enough in the book about amplifying truth. I talked about how not to amplify lies. I didn't say enough about how to amplify truth, because the same cognitive bias that helps people to believe something when they hear it over and over and over again, when it's a lie, it works for true information too. So the strategy that I've been talking about more and more as I go out on the road now is, what should we do? Tell the truth, tell it over and over from the largest platform that you can find. That is the number one best thing that you can possibly do in an information war. Understanding that you're putting your neck out when you do so.
Yeah, I might use that to put on my more traditionally questioning academic hat.
Sure.
I think one thing that I looked for in the book, and it's a short book and it has a very big punch that you can't, put too much in there to get the force of that punch. But one thing I did wonder why it wasn't in there was the political economy of journalism at this point, or some of the amplifiers that are supposed to speak truth. You talked about things like both sidesism, false equivalencies, horse race type coverage of political events. But there is a discussion in scholarly as well as more public circles that there's not really incentive for truth speakers, traditionally understood as such, to speak the truth. And B, for those of us who say, do try to get a platform and speak the truth, our sort of targets might not align in terms of targeted ads. Like, we're not pushing the same sort of emotionally identity bolstering language or, narratives. I hope you understand where I'm going with this. But I think
I do.
We need to maybe think about those structural things in addition to the,
I didn't emphasize that as much as I maybe should have, for a couple of reasons. I mean, it's a short book, but one is, if there are structural reasons why we're in that situation, writing a kind of a short polemic and explaining to people what the structural reasons are doesn't necessarily give them the tools in hand to do something about it. It explains it, but it doesn't necessarily offer them, the context of, here's what you can do, tomorrow. But the most important reason I didn't write that book is it's already been written. It's called Merchants of Doubt by Naomi Oreskes. And Eric Conway. And there's another terrific book by Jane Mayer called Dark Money. So if people want to understand the economic forces and the other structural forces behind the information ecosystem that we live in today, those books have been written. And I did say a little bit more about those in some of my other work, but I hardly recommend those two books as your introduction. And because here's the interesting part too that I notice. I mean, my work is based on this idea from Merchants of Doubt. This all started with science denial, and science denial was about money. And then it became about ideology and political power. And then post-truth comes along and, they said, oh, look, we can do to any reality we want what they already did to science. And then it's not necessarily about money, it's about other things. But the structure, the reason that it existed, that blueprint, the pathway was economic.
Yeah, those are some great recs to point people towards. I guess I'm just trying to marry the spirit of your book in my mind and in my work of going out there, getting the word out, speaking to people respectfully and empathetically, but as much amplification as possible. So one of the things that I focus on in my work is how varied a lot of Trump voters are in terms of where they are, where they voted for, why they voted for him, their backgrounds. And I think sometimes when we don't think about the very specific grounded communities and the problems they face, then when we do want to send messages to them or even engage with them, it kind of gets lost in translation. So I can give you a couple quick examples, but it sounds like you might know. You already get the gist of what I'm saying.
I know. I mean, I love your work, and I've tried to do similar work as a philosopher, untrained in field work, going out to talk to flat earthers, to talk to, other deniers and see, and they are varied, and they do have different, ideas about, why they're doing what they do. But the common thread is mistrust. The common thread is that they're getting bad information. It's not that the true information is not accessible to them, it's that they don't trust the people who are sharing it with them. And the thing to realize here is that one goal of disinformation is not just to get people to believe a falsehood, it's to distrust the person who's telling them the true information.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's a nice entree if you think about it. If you're out talking to someone, if you're out talking to a Trump supporter, or you're talking to somebody who thinks that there are microchips in the vaccines, or you're talking to somebody who doesn't believe in climate change, they universally think that they've been lied to. They mistrust because they think they've been lied to. And you can work with that, because the truth is they have been lied to. They just don't understand who was doing the lying. The example here is prescient about microchips in the vaccines. Everybody's heard of this idea that there were microchips in the vaccines, and I think I forget who did the estimate, but it was a reliable source that hundreds of thousands of people died from not taking the vaccines because they thought that there were microchips in the vaccines. Where did that come from? It came from Russian intelligence, but they didn't know that. So I mean, they were lied to by a malign actor and died, lost family members in that. So, I mean, could you convince somebody that they could take the vaccine because they were being lied to? Maybe, if you spent the time to find out what their interests really were and who they could really trust.
Yeah. I will say I was very struck by not just your call for empathy and respect, talking across the aisle or however you want to put it, but the way that you wrote the whole book. It made sense to me at the end when you said, essentially, I grew up in a working class, non-college household. to me, I thought, he gets it on some level. Like he's been in multiple sort of social worlds, let's say. So I was curious if you want to talk a little bit about that. I have a very similar background, and I find that very informs the way that I approach my research, but also our politics today and how I try to talk to people about it. So did your background, if I'm sussing it correctly, do you think it really impacted this book and the way that you wrote it?
Yeah, it did. I grew up poor. I grew up in a house where my parents believed in education and we had books. I mean, mostly we had the encyclopedia, which I read and enjoyed. But I grew up in a neighborhood that was close to the airport, the city dump, strip clubs, bars. It was a dangerous neighborhood, and it was, the schools were not terrific. And I mean, we were poor. There were 3 trailer parks within walking distance. And the reason we had a house is because my mom and dad built it. After World War II, came home. My dad more or less stole the nails from a job site and built a house. These were the nails that, fairness to my dad, the nails that when a carpenter bends, drop the nail and just leave it, and he didn't and built. We had it just a little bit better. We had a house, we had an encyclopedia. They wanted all their kids to go to college, and they did. But I know what it's like to be talked down to. I know what it feels like to have people think that if you're poor, you couldn't possibly be smart. Every respect for, who you can or cannot make a joke about or talk about doesn't extend to people who grew up in trailer parks. It doesn't extend to, people from the neighborhood that I grew up in. So I know what that feels like. So it felt to me when I got into this that the people I was trying to convince were the people that I grew up with. And they're not stupid. They're not unable to reason. They need to be respected and they need to be spoken to with a good deal of empathy. So yes, it did inform my approach, because I feel a lot of people got cheated in science denial, and a lot of people are getting cheated today with reality denial. I met a guy at the Flat Earth Convention who was one of the guest speakers. And we talked for a while, and I found out a few years later that he died of COVID because he was also a COVID denier. Now he was a victim. It was too bad.
I absolutely agree on all of that. As like someone who came from a working class background and now,
You're
as a
at
professor.
MIT.
Yeah. I mean, but it's interesting because I almost feel like a lot of my work, which does look at very specific pockets of conservative, rural conservative religious communities, is partially in reaction to a lot of the rhetoric that I have seen in spaces, elite institutional academic spaces that sort of just deride Trump voters as, racist, uneducated, stupid writ large.
Yes.
And that, it's just not a helpful thing, especially if
It is not.
Oh, here's the book. If nobody's seen it yet, it's very small and portable. Keep it in your purse or your backpack. But especially if we're going to, do something about it in talking to believers, but also amplification and creators. So I also wanted to talk, given that this is MIT, as you just pointed out, a bit about institutional knowledge creation. So in the book, you do point towards truth in that sort of direction. So like institutions like the press, academics as trustworthy places. How is that looking these days? Would you like to opine on that in terms of the sort of attacks we've seen on the press and academia right now and your work? Any thoughts?
I find it shocking that the main people who are standing up are comedians and Harvard. And I got to give a shout out to Wesleyan. I went to Wesleyan as an undergraduate, and their president is doing a terrific job standing up as well. But a lot of places have capitulated. You held up the book, and people can see that tiny little book. And the reason it's so tiny and what it is because I love, love, love Tim Snyder's book On Tyranny. That's the book that I read, and it kind of got me through Trump's first term and thinking about, I want to do a book like that now on what I see the problem as. And you open On Tyranny, and the first chapter says, do not comply in advance. What are the tech companies doing? What are the media companies doing? What are the universities doing? A lot of them are complying in advance. That is the one thing that you really cannot do. I mean, for one thing, that amplifies the perceived power of the person who's oppressing you. It makes them not have to expend the power to do more to get you, but it makes other people feel like, oh, well, it's inevitable. I mean, if Colombia is going to, roll over, we might as well roll over too. So I have, and comedians, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, because comedians, I read a piece about this the other day, and I don't want to plagiarize. Comedians have a sharp eye for the absurd, for the ridiculous, for the places where things don't fit. And I guess it maybe shouldn't surprise us that comedians are the ones who are being attacked and who are resisting and see things, as they are. I mean, the really shocking thing is the people who they really could take a risk and don't. And so it always makes me admire more the people who really have something to lose and they take a risk anyway. So, I mean, can I opine on it? That's my opinion. There are just shockingly few people who you would think would see where we are. I mean, we are not on the road to fascism. We are arguably there. Early, when Post-Truth came out, when On Disinformation came out, and I went on the road and I did talks, and kind of when the mic and the camera were off, people would ask me, and now I wish they'd been on so I could get credit for the prediction. But they would ask me, how is this going to come out? And I said, military in the streets policing American citizens, mass deportation, ultimately concentration camps, political prisoners. Where are we not there so far? I mean, concentration camps, maybe not that yet, but arguably so in ICE detention centers, and who knows where. I mean, we're not even a year into this yet. So I mean, I've got friends overseas who will not come to the United States. They're so, people from Europe who they've seen this before. This is how you boil the frog, right? I mean, they've seen this before. And it is very scary time. And, if you ask me as a human being living here in, the hellhole that is Portland, Oregon, do I worry about somebody knocking on my door in the middle of the night? Yeah, I really don't at this point. Could it happen? Yes, it could. And the thing is, if you look at countries like, we're not going to become Russia or China overnight. The worry is Turkey. The worry is Hungary, where you look at what happened in those countries. They're professed to be democracies. But what they did a few years ago in Turkey is that they said that propaganda, misinformation, was punishable by a prison sentence. But who was spreading the misinformation? It was the people who were fighting it. And then they were declared terrorists, and a lot of them were in prison. So they have a number of journalists in prison in Turkey. I can't go to Turkey based on things that I've said, though one of my earlier book was translated into Turkish. But you wonder, well, why are these journalists in prison? and someone from Turkey said, oh, well, they're all terrorists. Uh-huh. That could happen in the United States. Why are all these, I mean, Antifa has already been declared by Trump a terrorist organization. I don't know if he's done the same for Black Lives Matter. I know people in those movements. They are not domestic terrorists, but could they be targeted and hauled away in the middle of the night? Yes.
Mm. Ooh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh boy.
I mean, it's interesting that your book also has, I would say, a sort of optimistic flavor to it. There is still things we can do, fight back, lots of different lists about practical guidance, like when you interviewed various counterintelligence officials.
Counterintelligence and army intelligence.
Yeah. Do you still feel that way? Or some of this is coming from my, my experience too, where people are just tired and scared and much more than they might have been in 2023. So before we transfer to questions, I'll throw that last one at you.
And they're not watching the news either because they can't stand it.
Exactly.
Somebody told me resistance is a form of self-care, and I get that. You know, if I say I'm optimistic, then it tends to undermine the seriousness of the problem.
Yeah.
I want to say I've graduated from optimism to hope, because optimism kind of has this feeling that things are going to get better. You know, I believe in the future. But I forget who it was who said it. It's written down here, and I can't reach it without getting off camera, but hope is a discipline. Hope is a practice. I mean, if you have hope, you have to work at having hope. You have to do something to make hope fulfill itself. So I wouldn't say that I'm optimistic, because the predictions just keep being worse and worse and worse, the fulfillment. But am I hopeful? Yes. Primarily because I don't want to give up on my country. And I don't want to give up on the people that I know who are being victimized by this, some of whom are people who voted for Trump. But, and it's just on the tip of my tongue who said hope is a discipline or hope is a practice. I'm going to get that wrong, and it's going to bug me. Hang on.
Yeah, go for it.
Hang on a second. This the academic in me that it's gonna bug me until I get this.
Yeah, no, the citations are the thing.
Hope is a discipline. Miriam Kaba. Look it up.
All right. That's a good place for us to segue to questions from the audience. Actually, the first one is kind of very closely connected to what we were just talking about. Jane asks, what do we do? I am infuriated, terrified, engaged, doing what I can see to do, but none of it feels enough.
We need everybody to grab an oar and to do what they can. Nobody can do everything. That doesn't mean that you can do nothing. If we all, I mean, how many Navalny's do you need to bring down a Putin? Maybe not that many, which is why, Putin identified him. I mean, we need, like I said, tell the truth loudly from the largest platform that you can. If there were more people who understood that, if there were more, the one thing I wanted my book to do was to empower people, because now here, this is actually a nice bookend to what I said earlier. Disinformation has three goals. One is to get you to believe something false. Two is to mistrust and even to hate the truth tellers. But third is to feel hopeless and powerless and cynical. I don't want you to feel hopeless and powerless and cynical. That's why the end of the book has 10 steps of things that you can do, some of which are now dated, just, within a couple of years. But I mean, you're damn right. Yes, there are things that you can do. So even when you feel like there's nothing that you can do, there are things that you can do, even if what you're doing is supporting other people in not feeling hopeless. That's very important. This is like the 12 Angry Men and the movie, right? If one person, which is, based on earlier social psych work, if one person stands up, sometimes that's enough for other people to follow. If two people stand up, then sometimes you get a whole herd. So, use the words they don't want you to use, the words that are now banned on federal websites. Be loud, be annoying, go to the protests. You don't have to get arrested or tear gassed, but you have to show up.
Yeah, I actually opened the book to that last chapter where Lee gives those 10 things. Because I think, yeah, there are some things that are, particular number 9, take solace in the fact that there are many out there who are also engaged in this battle, like Lee. That, for me at least, gives me solace. Looking at all the people who are doing good work.
Thank you.
So, this is an interesting one. Why the puzzlement about platforms having given up on content moderation, given Elon Musk and other platform owners' alliance with subsidies, with subsidies by the Russians who peddle the most disinformation, including vaccine disinformation?
Yeah,
I wonder if they're asking if we're puzzled.
The minute I said that I was give up on content, why am I puzzled by why Elon Musk gave up on it? Okay, I'm not. But here's the thing, that the Center for Countering Digital Hate found in 2019 that some shocking amount, I think it was 65% or more, of the false information about vaccines on Twitter was due to 12 people. So, and that was pre-Elon Musk. Now, the night before Elon Musk took over at Twitter, I checked all 12 of those because I know who they are. 8 of them were on Twitter. So it means that even before Elon Musk, Twitter wasn't doing a good enough job. I mean, what could they have done? They could have deplatformed the liars. You know who one of those liars was? RFK Jr. They abdicated their responsibility. And I mean, what happened with Mark Zuckerberg? He, crumbled all of a sudden. He used to believe in this. He understands the problem. He once pretended that he didn't, but he does, and then he gives up on it. So I mean, yeah, I shouldn't be puzzled. I shouldn't be. It's just how do you explain that level of cowardice by billionaires? I don't understand it.
I will say from my end, so I've been involved in some projects looking at specifically third-party fact-checking and how it was almost single-handedly funded, the industry itself, post-2016 by Facebook. In my opinion, it was largely a PR effort, but then the plug was pulled 2024, 2025 after Trump was elected. The writing was on the wall for a while with that, and with the fact checkers that we interviewed. It wasn't a surprise for the people inside. It wasn't like the complete about face that it looked like from outside. I
get that. I mean, the fact checker, Glenn Kessler, the Washington Post, the guy with the Pinocchios, he just left the Washington Post. They have no plans to replace him. No, you're right. These things were coming. It wasn't overnight. It was coming for a long time.
Yeah. So here's another one, which is still focused on social media. And I think, you talk about this in your book, but we can update it a bit. So given the role that social media plays in spreading disinformation, do you believe tech companies should be regulated more strictly? And if so, what kind of regulation do you think would actually work without endangering free speech? And I'm going to tack on, are there things other than the fairness doctrine and Section 230, which you talk about in your book, that you think could be levers now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one thing we could do is point out the hypocrisy of all the folks crying about free speech in Congress and censorship, and then turning around and, embracing censorship in another name, but that's probably not going to work. But the best idea I ever heard was by Stephen Lewandowski, who's a professor at University of Bristol over in England. And he said that the real problem was the algorithms, that the algorithms were a black box, and that what we need is not to regulate the companies in terms of the content that they put up, take down, the human action. What we need is more transparency, which doesn't sound like censorship to me at all. We need more transparency in the algorithms. Could you make the algorithms that run YouTube and all these other companies such that they had to have a board of overseers? Experts, academic experts say, have all of the private user data blinded so that you couldn't so that privacy wasn't an issue. Because it always seems to me that the crisis comes, it's too late, a whistleblower, or after the harm's done, then they go back and they go, oh my God, yes, it was the algorithm. So why aren't more eyes on the algorithms? The algorithms are black boxes. Their inner workings are known pretty much only to a few people at each of the big tech companies. That's where the problem lies. I'm convinced. Stephen convinced me of this. So could the US Congress do something about that? I think that's not exactly low-hanging fruit, but I think that's something that you could have a persuadable sort of an argument about. Well, but don't you believe in transparency? But you're against censorship, right? So let's not censor the speech, but let's have more eyes on the algorithms of these private companies that are doing public harm. I think that is a winnable argument, and I credit Steve Lewandowski for sharing that.
Mm. When you say transparency, I think in your book, you say something about credible academics being able to look at the inner workings.
Yes.
But I'm curious what that looks like for you when you say transparency from a practical standpoint.
I could name so many people who are disinformation fighters, who are now out of work because their universities abandoned them, who are, and I'm not going to name them because anybody could do a Google search and find out who they are, and I don't want them to be, cause them any more trouble, but who are experts, all women, by the way, who are experts on tech, who are experts on how harm reads from tech platforms that are not careful about privileging, say, engagement over truth. So, I mean, practically, what could we do? There are, I don't want to say unemployed, but underemployed, recently criticized and maligned disinformation fighters who I can think of who would be terrific. And then people maybe say, oh, but but what about their politics? Well, gee, that's why you have more than one of them. That's why you have a board. That's why it's actually transparent. I don't know. I like the idea of that because it immediately defangs the claim that this is some censorship. It's not censorship, it's transparency. If Elon Musk believes so much in transparency, why are his algorithms opaque? I don't understand it.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just, as someone who's in an academic environment and who's wanted transparency as well, I also see that it's not a panacea. There's a lot of systemic stuff like, disinformation research is being flagged and defunded right now. But also like academic capacity. But that's a whole nother rabbit hole, and I won't go down it right now because we have more questions. Let's see. Oh, Katie, I'm a NASA astronaut who lived on the space station. How would you respond to these two different types of flat earthers? Number one, ones who are hoping they are wrong but want proof. And number two, ones who don't want to be convinced.
Oh, that's interesting. Flat earthers, I wrote about this in the opening chapter of my book, How to Talk to a Science Denier, where I talk about my experience at the Flat Earth International Conference in Denver in 2018. They are convinced, they're conspiracy theorists to the last person. And the reason they believe in flat Earth is because they think that there is a cabal of people in power who have lied to them. So drawing a distinction between the people who are hoping that they're wrong makes it sound like they're open to evidence. But to be open to evidence, they would first have to be open to trust. The trust is the barrier, I think. I said, I think in print, and certainly out on the road when I was talking about it, that to me, the problem of science denial in general is not an evidence problem or a fact problem, it's a trust problem. So that distinction, while a sharp distinction between the ones who are hoping that they're wrong, and the ones who aren't, here's one thing that I noticed. If you're a scientist, which I hope that somebody who lives on the space station is, you understand that a scientist is relentlessly looking for evidence to show that they might be wrong. Whether it's they're hoping or not, they're open to that evidence. They care about evidence. And here's the crucial point. If there is evidence to show that they're wrong, they change their mind. It's that last part that the flat earthers are missing. They will not change their mind when presented with evidence that shows that they're wrong. So that first group is very, very small. The group of people who are hoping that they're wrong. I didn't meet a lot of them. Maybe they're not the ones who go to the FEIC convention, but I didn't meet a lot of them. They were convinced that they knew the truth, and they knew the truth because they were the ones who had been awakened to the astronauts, yes, professors, pilots, government officials who had been lying to them because they were presumably getting something out of it. It's a fascinating subculture, and that's why I went to this convention, because I thought, if I can go there and talk to them and get them to listen to me and I listen to them, then I can talk to climate deniers, then I can talk to vaccine deniers. Well, then COVID hit. And so some of the research for the book was curtailed by the time I got to some of those latter topics, but it was really fascinating.
Yeah. Shout out to On the Ground Research.
Yes.
Always pushing it. Okay, so as a good follow-up, talking about who we can talk to and convince. As a college instructor, I understand and agree with Lee's arguments. My question is, how can we engage college students to read and persuade them about the role of disinformation when they don't like to read for school purposes?
God, I wish there were a book. A really short book that you could read in an hour. Yeah, you could, I tried to get MIT Press. MIT Press is wonderful. Their publicity, their marketing, just terrific team. I came up with a wacky idea that what they should do is, print up a few extra hundred and just leave them on the bus, leave them on the subway, kind of a guerrilla marketing campaign. And their money was better spent doing other things, I'm sure. But, that's, I don't know. How do you convince people to read? I wish I could get the book banned. If you could get it banned, then people would read it, wouldn't they? I live in Portland, Oregon, and there's my favorite bookstore here is Powell's Bookstore, and they have on their reader board right now, I just drove by it the other day, it said banning a book only makes people want to read it.
I think
Yeah,
I
so I
also,
don't know.
yeah.
I don't know what to do to get people to read a short, cute, timely book. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, as someone who also teaches college students, I think I get where this person's coming from because it's not just like about disinformation, it's just hard to get them to read, period. But I think there are ways to get them to
Yeah.
care about disinformation as younger people, even though
It,
it's a
yeah.
world that they've grown up with more so than some of
I I
us.
I haven't taught in 10 years. I recognize this is a growing problem. Look, that's one reason that I made the book so short and accessible because people don't like to read. Even readers sometimes don't like to read. So I wanted to have it be a book that they picked up, started the first page, and then couldn't put it down because they could read it literally within an hour. I
Mhm.
don't know what to do. If you can think of an idea, because I've still, the book's still in print, and I know the folks at MIT Press Publicity would, love to hear uh, other ideas. If you have any idea for how to get people to read it or other marketing campaigns, I tried to get them to print it out in different colors: red, purple, blue, yellow, orange, and sell it as a 6-pack so that you kept one and you gave 5 away. You know,
Oh, that's nice.
uh,
Yeah.
I had all these ideas, or take a page from the book and blow it up, but take out the identifying information, just put it up in the T tunnel so that people would read that book and go and then take a picture of it and go, I've got to read this book, and then they'd go get it. I like guerrilla marketing. But well, we'll see. Maybe for the next one.
Okay, we're going to get to the AI questions now.
All
I
right.
had a few lined up too, since this is MIT.
Yep.
Let's see. You mentioned AI will lead to more disinformation than ever before. How should this be addressed? I think you should. I'm also going to tack on to this person's question. How will it lead to more disinformation? Because I think that will connect with how you answer
Yeah.
it.
The problem of disinformation used to be there used to be a barrier to disinformation. If you look back at the disinformation that existed in the 2016 presidential campaign that was coming out of Russia, it was bad. I mean, it was persuasive enough that, if you just get a certain percentage, but it was not good disinformation. They were memes that had misspellings and, diction problems. And I mean, it was just the quality was not good. Um, but now it's so much easier. I mean, it's like asking the question of how did the Canon personal printer impact counterfeiting? Very much so, because you no longer needed an engraver to, fake those bills. You could do it on a personal copier. Better be careful. I used to work for the Fed, which detected counterfeiting. But I mean, I think the technology has probably moved on. That printer, the Canon, and I can't remember what it was, made counterfeiting so much more possible. So, putting the tools to make it easy just, makes it easier. I've often joked that you look in, it's not a joke, in Russia, they have troll farms. They have people pumping out disinformation. And the primary screening tool is how well do you speak English? They don't have to worry about that anymore. They've got Chat GPT. They don't need a troll farm. They need a troll garden. They need one person who's a very good speaker of English, and they can produce, the number, the volume and the quality of disinformation are going to increase. Now, the hard part, what can you do about that? Here's the problem. I've always been worried since the beginning of this debate, going back to, 2016 before, about things like deep fakes, that the real danger is not going to be that it's going to get you to think that a false thing is true. It's going to be that it gets you to think that a true thing is false. When fake videos are so prevalent that you say, I don't believe any videos anymore, that's the real trouble. I read an article in a law journal. Don't ask me why I was reading a law journal, but I read an article in a law journal recently where there was an attorney who was bemoaning the day when you would no longer be able to use audio and video evidence in court because fakes were going to be so prevalent that they would no longer be seen by juries as reliable sources. I think the only possible way to fight back against that is education, to let people, to try to help people understand how to differentiate between fake and real, not to get cynical, to instead bore in. In Finland, they have a curriculum starting in kindergarten, first grade, for how to tell fake news. We could do that here. We can't. We got to do that for the adults too, but we better get more literate about what's fake and what's not, because I mean, again, we're not on the road to this. We're here. They just announced last week was a bad week. I mean, they just announced the first AI actress. Her name is Tilly. She'll say and do anything you want. And she's looking for Hollywood representation. Agents are clamoring to represent her. Maybe put the screen actors out of business. Sora was just announced. So far, only available through invitation, but can you create a video in which they had you and me jumping out of an airplane with parachutes that were pizzas? Yeah, they could, because they've already done this. When we've all seen as educators what ChatGPT, and I haven't taught in 10 years, but we've all seen what ChatGPT has done to the student essay. I mean, it is shocking. So I think the only thing that we can do is try to become more aware and try to keep the tech, for finding it up to date. But even as I say that, I recognize the problem, because there is no technological solution to human malevolence. You can't, we're not going to out-tech our way. I'm sorry, I know it's MIT. You cannot out-tech your way of the disinformation problem. And AI making it easier, yeah, we need a lot of tech help. But they've got a philosophy department, and a really good one. Philosophy and linguistics, as I believe, at MIT. And they need them too. And they need the sociologists and the science writers and the other people on this problem too. It's not just a tech problem.
Yeah, so much of that was throwing me back to a lot of the work that I've done in previous groups around deep fakes and fact checking, and how much fear there was in the last few election cycles around it. But I will say, on the education front, at times it's easy to say literacy and just leave it at that, or education and just leave it at that. So I'm really glad you pointed out Finland.
Finland.
I think that it's a similar pedagogical thing, but I worked a lot with some Norwegians who've been pushing this concept of source criticism. So really looking at where these things come from, not just like the content itself. That's one way to sort of get around, the initial, like, is this fake or not? Are there multiple hands or arms? Is the language wrong? And we'll have to adjust as we go.
And you shouldn't be lost on anybody that if you look at a map, Finland shares a border with Russia. I mean, they're used to this. There are other things that adults can turn to. A friend of mine, Andy Norman, wrote a book called Mental Immunity. Another friend, Sander Vanderlinden, wrote a book called Foolproof. I mean, there are tools available to adults who care to learn how to think better about these sorts of things.
Yeah, and it's often very context dependent, unfortunately. There is no panacea. So anyway, okay, we have a lot of questions and we have 15 minutes I think. So I will try to get us through a few more. Right now, there is a lot of focus on the dialectics of free speech and what the limits may be. How do we think that social media companies can moderate disinformation, but do it in a way that is not considered censoring free speech?
Just wrote an article on this with Sander Vanderlinden in Time magazine. We did an op-ed called How to Fight Disinformation Without Censorship. There are several ways to do it, and I don't you said we've got a lot of questions, so I don't want to just repeat the article here, but I
Sure.
will say that
Yeah.
if you think that there aren't ways, there are. Was that a cop-out answer? I'm sorry.
I don't think
but-
so. If you point them to the Times article.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
but I will say
Time magazine.
you also talk about free speech as, I would say, almost a smokescreen in this book, which I think is a really important point to keep in mind whenever the censoring or free speech stuff comes up. It can be really weaponized.
Well, yes, because it's the easiest thing. I mean, it's the easiest thing in the world to claim that the people who are fighting mis and disinformation are trying to censor.
Exactly. Executive Order 14 whatever.
Yeah, and the thing is that it's important to realize that that claim is itself part of the strategic campaign by disinformers. This was true of Jim Jordan way before, Trump got reelected. It was, this was a strategy. There was money behind it. There was political interest behind it. I talked to my pals and we saw this coming and tried to get major media outlets to take this seriously early on, and they finally did. But this this was upsetting because we saw it coming. They're going to claim it's censorship. Yeah.
Asterisk to always sort of look at the politics of it when there's a censorship claim is kind of what I was trying to put in. So somewhat related question. How do we distinguish between difference of opinion and disinformation, especially when it comes to interpretation of current events? Example, are people protesters or terrorists? Is something a war or a genocide? Those are 2 examples they're giving.
I love that question. Because the reason I love that question is because I think that the best way to approach something like that is human face-to-face conversation. Online in the comments section, you're not going to get there. But if you're having a face-to-face conversation with somebody that you really disagree with, they're going to ask you, what do you mean by terrorism? How we disagree. Do we disagree over facts? Why do we disagree over the facts? What are your sources? One of my most powerful questions when I, go out on the road, I'm not a physicist. I'm not an expert on climate change or vaccines, but I'm a philosopher. And so I will ask people, why do you believe that? More powerfully, I ask them, what evidence, if I had it in my back pocket, could change your mind? That's the question that really flummoxes them. That's Karl Popper's question, the philosopher par excellence, right? Because if you're really a scientist, you would change your mind if somebody could produce compelling evidence. So tell me, what is the evidence that if I had it could change your mind? And if the person can't tell you what that evidence is, then they're not a scientist. And that's a moment that can only be appreciated in face-to-face conversation, I think. Somebody asked Theodore Dobzhansky one time, eminent evolutionary biologist, what it would take for him to give up evolution by natural selection. And he said, rabbit fossils in the Precambrian era. Pretty damn specific, right? Great answer. Great answer. So then But so ask that of your conversation partner. What would it take to convince you of, whatever the thing is? I am really look, it's not going to solve the problem. It's not sufficient to solve the problem. But I enjoy and I need to do more of face-to-face conversation. Because if people remember that disinformation doesn't just poison somebody's ability to reason, it makes them hate you. But it's hard to hate somebody face-to-face with a smile on their face who's curious about what you really think. Somebody who will say to you, but why do you think that? Or I say, well, now I'm going to ask you a hard question now. You know, I'm a philosopher. You're going to let me ask you a hard question? And they always say, oh yeah, sure. I'll say, why do you think that? I mean, who told you that? And then they tell me, and I say, but why do you trust them? You know, I mean, you can do that in person much better than you can in writing.
I love that. That jives so much with my field work with rural media, conservative media. But you have to also like be there and enjoy it on some level. Yeah,
If
anyway,
you're not if you're
okay.
not enjoying it, you shouldn't be there. I have a friends that I wrote about in the How to Talk to a Science Denier book, um, who run their own it's tiny. I mean, I think they run it out of their dining room, called Hear Yourself Think. And they go out to political rallies and present the opposite point of view and engage people in conversation and film it and then offer seminars about how to do it. Not angry, spitting, shouting
Yeah.
conversations, but real, genuine connection conversations.
Yeah, or for entertainment of the other side.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. This is a direct follow-up in some ways to what you were
sure,
just saying.
sure.
How do you deal with deniers that have backgrounds in science and engineering, yet they still insist on coming up with ways to dispute the evidence based on their own view of the data or their own identity? I'm adding that in based on your book. Example, making the statistics fit their own model.
It's a shocking fact that sometimes the most virulent deniers are the best educated ones because they know how to defend their point of view. They know the 16 studies that you haven't read yet, or they can, or when you say, if you could show me such and such. I did this one time. You know, somebody asked me, what would convince you that the MMR vaccine caused autism? And I mentioned some specific thing, and then they immediately shot me a study. Well, it was a flawed study, but by God, they had it at their fingertips. They were, they were ready to go. So what do I say to them? I mean, look, theoretically, sometimes they're the hardest because they're ready to go. I mean, they've got their arsenal, but they also might be open to to your side of it if you've got the information as well. I remember that exchange ended in something of a mutual understanding, not about that topic, but that we had a lot more in common because as the conversation went on, this was online, but as the conversation went on and on and on, it turned out that we had just a shocking amount in common from our background, the way we grew up. I mean, it was amazing. And so that wall of hatred began to disappear. And by the way, for me too, right? For me to just not to say, oh, you're not worth my time, you're not worth talking to. I don't like it when I feel that way. When I feel that, like somebody's not worth talking to. Because usually, I mean, unless somebody's a shill, unless they're, making money on it or something, there's something behind it. And sometimes it's fear. And if you really listen to somebody, vaccines is a good topic. If you really bother to sit down and just listen to why somebody's scared, they will tell you, and they'll tell you what could convince them. Because what parent wants to put their child at risk? I mean, they will, you can have a good conversation. And there are instances in which scientists have convinced people to change their mind because through empathy, through listening. That was in the earlier book, not in On Disinformation. How to convince other scientists? I mean, look, scientists should be the easiest to convince because scientists are committed to being convinced by data. And it is irrational to believe the hypothesis that has worse data over one that has better data. Some people kind of read themselves out of the profession, or worse, look, sometimes they go beyond, like they're super eminent in this field, And so they'll think, well, I'm so brilliant, but I'll make
Mm-hmm.
this speculation on this other field, or I have no
Uh-huh.
credentials whatsoever. That's
Yeah,
sometimes, a factor too. But I mean, scientists should be the
absolutely.
easiest to convince if they embrace the scientific attitude, I call it, which is to care about evidence and be willing to change your mind on the basis of evidence. If they've
Mm.
got that, you should be able, to convince them with evidence. Doesn't always happen.
Well, this is the third in a trio of questions that I think are all very related, and it follows up again. So how do you have a debate with someone about a topic that you're not an expert on, but you know it's true?
Have I
So
got an
say you aren't
article?
a scientist.
Yeah. Have I got an article for you? In Nature Human Behavior 2019, there is an article by Cornelia Bache and Philip Schmid. I forget the title of the article, but they did an empirical study of two ways of interacting with science deniers. One was called content rebuttal, where you present them with the facts. And the other was technique rebuttal, where you recognize that deniers all follow the same blueprint. They cherry pick evidence. They're conspiracy theorists. They're illogical reasoners. They believe in fake experts and they think science has to be perfect. But if you understand those 5 points, they talk in that article about how you can engage whether you have specific content knowledge or not. Here's the brilliant thing about their study and why I wrote about this study in my book. They found that technique rebuttal was just as effective as content rebuttal. So, I mean, I'm not disrespecting anybody who got a PhD, in whatever, but a layperson who understands how technique rebuttal works can be just as effective in talking to somebody who's a denier, which means that we don't have an excuse. We can't say, oh, the scientists
Mhm.
ought to be out there doing it. I mean, look, you're a scientist, you're a sociologist, you're a scientist. I'm a philosopher. I'm not a scientist, but I understand technique rebuttal because I understand, those 5 steps. And, I mean, illogical reasoning, cherry picking. Yeah, I understand how to do that. So that's the energy that I go in with. So
Mm.
put your mind at ease. Not only can you use that, it's just as effective as if you were a scientist.
That's a great note for us to end on, I think. An optimistic or hopeful note.
Hopeful.
I'm going to turn it, hopeful. Thank you so much, Lee. I'm going to turn it over to Kaija to close things out for us.
What
And
great
thank you.
questions. Thank you to everybody and to you, Rebekah.
Yes, thank you both, Lee and Rebekah, for such a provocative conversation and questions and answers from the audience. Thank you for engaging and for showing up this evening and for wanting to learn more about this topic and what we can do in the world to mitigate some of these challenges that we are moving through in this present time. As a reminder, for those in the MIT community, we will host a lunch and community discussion tomorrow, October 9th at 12 p.m. noon in the Hayden Library Nexus. And I want to thank you again for joining us virtually for this evening's presentation. I hope you all have a great evening. I hope you enjoy your dinners. This now concludes our event. Good night.